What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about 5 older flagship smartphones that you can get for 300 bucks and under. So we're going to start off with the Oneplus 8. You can actually find this easily around $250 if you shop around. This phone does have a 6.5-inch Fluid AMOLED display. It's 90 Hz with HDR10 plus. It is also a 1080p panel, 402 for the PPI. Overall, it's a really nice looking panel. It has a slight curve to it. Colors are good. Again, the 90 Hz is pretty smooth, so I really like the display on here. It has a punch hole on the left hand side as well. This phone also has Android 11, and you will also get the Android 12 update. This phone has a pretty powerful chip, the Snapdragon 865 chip, and the Adreno 650 chip on here. So basically, it's still very fast. When it comes to launching applications. When it comes to gaming, you pretty much be able to play pretty much anything at high settings. So it's a very fast phone still in that regard. This phone does not have any type of SD card support. The base storage is 128 gigs and 6 gigs of RAM on here, or 8 gigs. I have the 8 gig version. You can really get the 8 gig version for pretty cheap as well. So this phone does have stereo speakers, which sound pretty good. No headphone jack on here. NFC is on board. The under the display fingerprint sensor does work pretty well, so I really like that. Now the cameras on here are pretty decent and good lighting. Now it's not going to be the best cameras on this list, but they are pretty decent. I don't really have a huge issue with it. So you have a 48 megapixel standard, 16 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel macro, 4K video at 60, and then a 16 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 1080p. Basically, my only issue with the camera is kind of the image processing or the coloring. It just kind of looks off sometimes, so you might have to edit the photos. But in general, you can get a pretty good shot out of this phone, especially for the price. It's really not anything to complain about. You do have pretty decent battery life, a 4,300 milliamp battery, 30-watt charging as well too, so it charges pretty fast. So overall, the OnePlus 8 is still a pretty solid phone. I'm able to get a day of battery life, and it's just overall a great performer. Next is going to be the LG V60. Honestly, my personal favorite on the list. This phone really has everything you could want. This phone has a super nice design. It's aluminum frame, glass back, and it's just built like a tank. It just feels extremely solid in the hand. It is a 6.8-inch display. It's POLED HDR10 plus, so it's a pretty massive phone at 1080p and then 395 for the PPI. It does have the water drop notch. Overall screen quality is really good. It's a very bright display and very colorful display as well. This phone also has Android 10 with the Snapdragon 865 chip and the Adreno 650. So again, basically very powerful phone. Check out the gaming tests I've done on these phones, and you can see performance wise it's going to be a beast. You can pretty much play anything at high settings. This phone also has SD card support, 128 gigs of internal storage and 8 gigs of RAM on the base model. And then this phone has the headphone jack with the quad DAC, so if you really are into audio and you have a great pair of headphones, you can really take advantage of some high quality audio. The stereo speakers are also top notch on here, very loud, great bass quality, just excellent speakers. The under the display fingerprint sensor, while it's not the best, it does get the job done, but again, it's not the fastest. But like I said, I haven't had an issue. Now, my only issue there is that there's no face unlock on this phone, so you're kind of stuck with that. But in general, I've never had like a massive issue with it. Now, the cameras on this phone are pretty good. It's a 64 megapixel standard, a 13 megapixel ultra wide, and a 0.3 depth sensor. It also shoots in 8K as well too, which is really nice. And then you have a 10 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 4K 30. Image quality is pretty clean on the V60. You get some really nice looking shots, great dynamic range, great ultra wide, and then you also have really good color accuracy on here as well. Very natural looking shots on here. This phone has excellent battery life, a 5,000 milliamp battery with wireless charging, and it is just a beast. Overall, you can easily squeeze a day and a half out of this phone. Alright guys, next is going to be the iPhone XS. This is such an excellent buy, and really just one of my favorite picks for anybody who's looking for a cheaper iPhone. So this one still has, in my opinion, a beautiful design, stainless steel frame, glass back, IP68 dust and water resistant. It's got the Super Retina OLED display on here at 5.8 inches, so it's kind of compact in 2022, 1125 by 2436 resolution, so very high res screen on here, 458 for the PPI, And like I said, OLED display, just absolutely a beautiful display here. Now this phone is running iOS 15.3, and the thing about this phone is it has the Apple A12 chip, so this phone is still blazing fast and running through iOS, and also gaming performance is still top notch on this phone. I was able to play pretty much any game at high settings, no problem. So I was really impressed with performance on this older flagship phone. Base storage, you get 64 gigs, which is a little low, I guess, but you have 4 gigs of RAM on here. You can always use the cloud storage as well. The stereo speakers on here are pretty solid too. They get really loud, good bass quality. The vibrations are pretty solid. You also have NFC on here as well as the Face ID. Which still works flawlessly, and this phone still has pretty decent cameras. You do have a 12 megapixel standard and then a 12 megapixel telephoto with 2x optical zoom. You also have 4K video at 60 frames and then a 7 megapixel selfie cam at 1080p, and it also does 60 frames. So basically you can get some very good shots with the iPhone XS, even in good lighting. Now low lighting, yeah, the shots can be a little iffy, but in good lighting you can still get awesome shots and also really great video on this phone. This phone does have a 2658 milliamp battery, so 9 times out of 10 you're going to be buying this refurbished or used, so it really depends on your battery health. But if you have pretty decent battery health in the 80s, then you definitely can squeeze around 5 hours of screen on time out of this phone pretty easily. So I think battery life, again, not the best but pretty decent on this device. Alright, so next is going to be the Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus. This is still a very awesome phone. It's got the aluminum frame, glass back on here, and it's IP68 dust and water resistant as well too. It still has a very nice design. It's got the dynamic AMOLED display at HDR10. It's a 6.4 inch display. It's a full 1440p display, 522 for the PPI. Overall, just a beautiful display. You also have that dual camera punch hole, which we will talk about. This phone is upgradable to Android 12 or the One UI 4 update. You do have the Snapdragon 855 chipset with the Adreno 640. Again, this phone is still a phenomenal gaming device as well. If you guys check out my full gaming test, it still plays Fortnite at 60 frames, PUBG high. It does a really great job at gaming, so this is definitely an awesome gaming device. You also have micro SD card support, 128 gigs of internal storage, and 6 or 8 gigs of RAM. You can easily find the 8 gig for 300 bucks. You also have on here stereo speakers, which sound very crisp and clear, very loud as well. You do have the headphone jack on board. NFC is on board. The under the display fingerprint scanner is on here. It works super fast. And you also have the Samsung desktop support on here as well too, which is really nice. So it's got really all the flagship bells and whistles, like the reverse wireless charging and stuff like that. This phone also has a triple camera setup, a 12 megapixel standard, 12 megapixel telephoto lens with 2x optical zoom, and then a 16 megapixel ultra wide on here as well. You also have 4K video at 60 frames, and then a 10 megapixel standard, and then a 8 megapixel wide selfie that actually is, technically a depth sensor. It is a 4K at 60 as well for the front camera. And basically you can still get some really good shots out of this phone, especially in good lighting, very good detail, good dynamic range, a pretty decent coloring. So overall, this is just a solid phone in general. So this phone also has a 4100 milliamp battery with wireless charging and reverse wireless charging and 15-watt charging. So basically you can still get easily get a day of battery life out of this phone. I can easily get like 6 hours of screen on time out of this guy. So overall, the S10 Plus is extremely solid buy for people who just love Samsung devices. Alright, next is going to be the Oneplus 7 Pro here, and this is just an awesome device for people who just really love this full screen design. It's a fluid AMOLED display, 90 Hz HDR10 Plus at 6.67 inches. It is a 1440p display, 516 for the PPI. And again, the thrill with this phone is really just the beautiful notchless, punch holeless display here. It is really nice to watch content on this phone. It just looks really beautiful and very futuristic. You also have an aluminum frame, glass back design on here. So overall, the design of the phone still looks really good for an older flagship phone. This phone does have Android 11. It is upgradable to Android 12. You do have the Snapdragon 855 in the Adreno 640 chip on here, so performance is still pretty good like all the other Snapdragon 855 phones. Check out my gaming test. So it still does really great in that regard. No SD card support, 128 gigs of internal storage and 6 gigs of RAM on the base model. You can easily find the 256 and 8 gig version for, you know, 300 bucks easily. You do have stereo speakers, which sound pretty good, sound pretty decent. You also have NFC on here as well. The under the display fingerprint sensor, extremely fast, one of my favorites. And you can also use the pop-up selfie camera for the face unlock, which is really awesome too. Every time I do it, anytime, you know, I'm around someone, they always very curious, and it always looks really cool as well. Now this phone does have a triple camera setup, a 48 megapixel standard, 8 megapixel telephoto with 3x optical zoom, and a 16 megapixel ultra wide. It shoots in 4K 60, along with a 16 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 1080p. The cameras on here, if you're in good lighting like outdoors, I took it to like the zoo, it takes really great shots. I had zero complaints. Even with the telephoto, the ultra wide, it takes great shots. It's only when you're in lower lit conditions that it'll kind of struggle a little bit. Color will be kind of off. So it does take really good cameras and, you know, great lighting outdoors. It is when you get out of any type of good lighting scenario, it just kind of gives you just meh kind of photos. But overall image quality decent at this price point. Battery life is pretty decent on here, 4,000 milliamp battery with 30-watt charging, so this thing charges pretty fast. There is no wireless charging and there is no IP rating officially, but this phone can get wet. But as far as battery life, you know, I can easily, you know, go through a day on this phone, no problem. I can easily squeeze 6 hours. So overall, the OnePlus 7 Pro, again, the thing is the display. If you watch a lot of content, you'll love this phone. So that's pretty much it. Be sure to let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.